Неправильное применение научных аналитических методов сдерживает.
Incorrect usage of analytical methods is holding up the innovations in the modern business. That is why it has to limit with the fields which it was designed for and unite it with the other forms of thinking in order to create most fertile grounds for the innovations. This has to be incorporated into business education and into education in particular. This is going to be told by Roger Martin, author of books, consultant, emeritus professor, School of Management of Rotman of Toronto University, rating Thinkers 50. Roger, please welcome.
Organizations. It's a paradox because at the same time, we are in what has to be considered the golden age for disruptive startups. We've got edtech, medtech, biotech, fintech, everything disrupting every industry. We have places like this, many, as we say in America, football fields long, full of companies that are innovating. So why is it that there's so much frustration in existing companies about the pace and level of innovation, while we have, I think it's fair to say, the golden age of disruptive startups? To me, the culprit is analysis, which is an odd culprit because it's the sexiest, hottest thing going in business now, right? Data analytics, AI. You'd think that for innovation, that would be an unalloyed good, right? That would be the thought. So what is data analytics? What's it used to do? Fundamentally, it's to figure out what drives what causes what. We figure out something on the independent axis, the x-axis, and then go and get a sample of data to figure out what the dependent variable does based on that data. And we plot something like that, and the holy grail, of course, is what? It's that line, right? That regression line that says, this relates to that. We can even think that this causes that. That's the fundamentals of data analytics, right? But let's go back. Let's go back to, again, the foundations of how we decide we know something, right? We think we know something here because there's that line. And there's a correlation there. And if the R-square is high enough, we think we know something. But how do we know something, right? Well, if you have a phenomenon, please. If you have a phenomenon and you have a universe, the entire universe, right, of that phenomenon, what we tend to do, right, is take a sample from that universe. right? A sample of that universe. That's what you'd have learned in Statistics 101. You sample that universe. Though in the modern era, there are many people in the world of data analytics that say, oh no, you actually can take the entire universe. It makes no difference to this analysis. But the general notion is you sample from that universe. What do we know? What have we learned? What have we been taught in statistics about that sample? What are the required characteristics of that sample? The number one required characteristic of that sample is that it's representative, right? The sample must be representative of the universe. If it's not representative, right, if we sample only men and we try to make inferences about people, that's not representative. If we interview people from Moscow, right, and determine that's you can say things about Russia. No, that's not a representative sample. The absolute key: you cannot make a useful inference about the universe unless you have a sample that is representative of that universe. That's why we do statistically significant random sampling from the universe, because only if it's representative can we make an inference of any sort. If we do not have a representative sample, we cannot make an inference of any sort. In fact, you will have been taught in Statistics 101, your first year statistics course, if you took one, you'd have been taught that that is where danger lies. Danger, danger, danger. You'll start to believe something from an unrepresentative sample, and that something will be dangerously wrong. So far, so good? Okay. So that's the fundamental of data analytics. The fundamental of data analytics says we have a representative sample that can cause us to make inferences about the universe so we can say this is what we should do. And we have what? We have the data to back what we've done. So we're in the right? We're doing the right thing. There is, however, a gigantic challenge with data, right? So data occurs over time, right? And if you ask the question, where's data from? If you're speaking of time t equals 0 is the time you perform the analysis. Okay, so let's set that as this red dotted line. The time you perform the analysis is t equals 0. And then if you ask the question, please be watching, and when I press the green button, please advance slides. That would be nice. Thank you. If we ask the question, where does data reside? Where does data reside? Is this not true? 100% of the world's data resides in the past. Do we have data about the future? No. 100% of the world's data resides in the past. So when we analyze data at time t equals 0, how representative is it of the world we are about to enter? Is it so representative that we can make an inference to the universe to say, this causes that? We know because we've done the data analytics, and the data analytics says people like blue more than they like red. Right? Can we say that? Well, there was a really smart guy who opined on this, and he's particularly interesting in what he was smart about. And his name was Aristotle, 4th century BC Greek philosopher who invented the scientific method. Now, many of you would have been taught that it was Bacon, Newton, Galileo, Descartes, and the scientific revolution that invented the scientific method. No, they just formalized something that Aristotle wrote, something called analytica posterior, or posterior analytics. And he had a point of view about when it is and when it is not safe to use data analytics. He didn't call it data analytics. He called it posterior analytics. And what he made is a distinction. And this is a distinction that is incredibly important to innovation and is unfortunately not generally taught in the world. So what distinction did he make? Oh, the implicit assumption here, right, of course, is the future is like the past. That's what gives us this inference. So can we make that assumption? Aristotle had something to say about that. What Aristotle said is there's a part of the world, and he described it as the part of the world where things cannot be other than they are. So in that part of the world, that would be representative of this. If I let go of this, what is going to happen? It's going to fall. If I did that last week, what would have happened? It would have fallen. If I did it 100 years ago, it would have fallen. If I do it next week, the next week, if I do it in Moscow, if I do it in Miami, anywhere I do it, this will fall. Why? It's because it's part of the world, as Aristotle said, where things cannot be other than they are. These are immutable laws of nature, right? Where we can take a sample from the past and be fully confident it is representative of the future. Right? Think about it. If it's in the part of the world where things cannot be other than they are, any data we have from the past is representative of the future. And Aristotle said, in that part of the world, you should use the method he created, the scientific method. That's what you should do, because you will figure out by looking at the past what will happen in the future, and you can optimize your world to that. He said, in fact, in that part of the world, the job of human beings is to understand the causes of the effects we see so that we can optimize to those. If people who smoke seem to die of lung cancer all the time, if we can get them to stop smoking, we'll have less lung cancer, because lungs aren't going to change, nicotine isn't going to change. It's part of the world where things cannot be other than they are. But the father of science, the guy who created the scientific method that we all use for all of the data analytics that the previous speakers, and I'm sure others have been speaking about, said the following. He said, there's another part of the world where things can be other than they are. What would be an example of that? Well, I will use the same thing, right? How many of these were there in 1999 smartphones? Any guesses? How many of these there were in the world in 1999? 0. The first one was in 2000. The first BlackBerry was in 2000. Do you know how many of them there are now in the world, right now? 4.4 billion was the last estimate I had. Is it more than that even now? Last estimate I had 4.4 billion. That is the part of the world where things can be other than they are, right? People's habits change, they adopt new things, they do things differently. That's the part of the world where things can be other than they are. What did Aristotle say about that part of the world? The father of science, the guy who gave us science, right, said, don't use my method. And he wasn't ambiguous about it. It wasn't like, I'm not sure if it's so hot. He said, do not use my method. Now, why would he say that? Well, because if you use the scientific method, you are assuming the future will be like the past, and you cannot figure out anything about a different future than the past that you've just analyzed. In fact, you will convince yourself the future will be like the past. You will stop yourself from doing that, because what he said is, in that part of the world, imagination is what you need to use. What he said is how you should conduct yourself in that part of the world is to imagine possibilities and choose for the one for which the most compelling argument can be made. Not for which there is the most data, it's for which the most compelling argument can be made. And he said, in this part of the world, the job of human beings is to be the cause of a new effect they want to see, right? To do what? To innovate. And the only way you're going to change the world is by not making data-based decisions. I'll state that again. The only way you're going to change the world is to not make data-based decisions, not use data analytics. And the father of science said that, not just anybody. So rather than obsessing about what is true, right? Analyzing the past to figure out what is true now, we should be asking what would have to be true. What would we need to do to make something true that is not true now? That is actually the task. And if I asked about the scientific method and how it does or does not contribute to us inventing futures that do not now exist, there's a real challenge. So this is strip down the scientific method, construct a hypothesis, design and conduct an experiment, analyze the data, and draw a conclusion, and then think about the next hypothesis, and so on. Some people say, oh no, it's got these steps. You've got to ask a question, conduct research, construct hypotheses. There's an interesting phenomenon, and I will ask anybody in the audience here to help me on this if you can. In the world, there are literally thousands of PhD courses on how to design and conduct experiments. So I ran a business school for 15 years, one little business school. There are 561 accredited business schools in North America, so one little business school. And there would have been a dozen courses, PhD courses on this in my school, because we had 6 different PhD streams. They each had courses on this, right? We have thousands of PhD courses on methods for analyzing data, right? All sorts of them. We've got thousands of PhD courses on how to draw conclusions. And for those of you who have a PhD in this room, I'm sure you've had courses in each of those, regardless of what kind of PhD you did. Am I correct? You just had courses and courses on that in your PhD program. Here's where you can help me. I'm searching for one course in the world on how to create a novel hypothesis. Haven't found one yet, right? I don't know if you know or read the great Tom Wolfe, American novelist classic, The Right Stuff, right? He was chronicling the U.S. space program and the test pilots that were involved in it, and they had an expression that the way they trained you to be a successful test pilot is to send you up in a plane, and if you didn't crash, you had the right stuff, right? And if you crashed, you must not have had the right stuff. That's actually PhD education, right? We actually give them a PhD and then send them out with no training whatsoever on how to create a hypothesis. This would be no training whatsoever to somebody who wants to have a family on how babies happen, right? And then hope that they can create a novel hypothesis. So we actually, I think, are wasting a huge opportunity to help people figure out, if they're going to be scientific, how to create that novel hypothesis about the future that they can test to make it possible. Thank you. So the great innovation challenge to me is this, that we have to combine 2 things to innovate. We need to crunch whatever data can be crunched without saying, I will do what the data says and combine that with a lot of intuitive thinking, right? The problem is, of course, that we're taught analytical thinking is got to be data-driven, and again, you heard it here, You must make data-driven choices. You must make data-driven choices. You must make data-driven choices. It's data-driven, intuitive thinking, the kind that's required for imagination, is judgment-based. What we need to do is train people to be omnivorous. We're now teaching them to be either a carnivore or a herbivore, and that's not going to get us innovation. Not innovation of the sort we want, the speed we want. We have to teach people two kinds of thinking styles. The kind of thinking styles that we're fixated on these days is the manipulation of quantities. What do I mean by that? I don't mean manipulation in some negative way. I mean, when you go to first grade or kindergarten, you learn your first quantitative manipulation technique, right? It's called addition. It's a technique you're taught that allows you to usefully manipulate quantities. And when you learn that, you learn subtraction, multiplication, division, calculus, fluid dynamics, resistance, whatever. We're now obsessing about teaching people ever more sophisticated methods for manipulating quantities. Meanwhile, we are not teaching them, and especially in the world of business, we're not teaching them about appreciation of qualities, making fine qualitative distinctions in things they see out in the world, like a sommelier, like a cordon bleu chef, like an art historian. It's understanding the qualitative dimensions of things that cannot be quantified and cannot be analyzed as data. They are all critical to forming that unique hypothesis about a future that we could make, which is what innovation is in the first place. So what we have to be innovative is comprehensive consideration of data, and consideration of qualities, qualitative insights. That one thing that we saw that will give us a spark, that isn't on the regression line, that'll give us a spark about the future. And for me, and I'll close with this thought, my belief that it is anomalies that are a key to innovation. And anomalies actually are the key to novel hypotheses. But we ruthlessly suppress anomalies in the world. You're all aware, of course, of the Human Genome Project, right? Human Genome Project, biggest scientific effort of the last half century, billions and billions and billions of dollars, lifetimes of scientists doing it. I bet you thought that the Human Genome Project sequenced the human genome. Am I correct? No. Am I correct that that's what you would think that it did? Yes? It didn't. It took 719 human genomes and created an average genome. It removed all the things that didn't kind of fit and that were anomalous to create this thing that didn't exist in nature, which was this average aggregate composite DNA, which they then sequenced. So essentially, they took the regression line, they manufactured a regression line, and then said, this is the human genome. Now, since then, they've made some advances. It's down to 19 composite now. But some of the greatest scientific discoveries since the Human Genome Project, medical discoveries, come from looking at the anomalies. I found this out from interviewing, actually, one of the world's leading, if not the leading, autism spectrum disorder scientist, geneticist, working on that, Dr. Stephen Shearer, the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. And he said all of his science and nature papers that made him famous in the field came from looking at the anomalies in the genome that everybody else tossed out. Everybody else is tossed out as if they didn't exist because they're so obsessed with the regression line. So my advice to you is if you want to innovate, be super careful about becoming a slave to data analytics. Recognize that it's an imaginative act that requires appreciation of qualities. It means asking what would have to be true, can I make that true, and watching the anomalies, because they will give you clues to what that future might look like, that you could make the future into that, and you will be the best innovator you can be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roger.
Yes.
But we still have one important question for you.
Yes, sir.
So we decided to begin a time capsule tradition
Yes.
here at the forum and collecting forecasts from our headliners.
Yes.
And would surely appreciate if you share your vision answering the following question. So, what scientific innovation that can radically change a person's life can be introduced in 2022? But before answering,
Yes, sir.
be careful, because we will open time capsule just in a year, and we'll call you back.
Yes, well, so this is what they call, at least in America, fool's errand. I'll probably be demonstrated wrong. So it's probably not in purely in the scientific domain, because that's not a domain that I'm an expert in. But in terms of a change that I see happening in the way the world works, is I see the coming of more cooperative ventures. So I think people are increasingly worried about, and if we just use Facebook as an example, Facebook having all our data, knowing everything they want about us, helping us connect, and then making hundreds of billions of dollars on that. I think people are going to say, you know what, it's a heck of a lot easier to communicate with one another than it ever was. We can figure out how to do that cooperatively in a co-op, right? And we'll just do that ourselves, and we'll own the upside of that collectively. Now, this is not completely new. For much of the history of the life insurance industry and the property and casualty insurance industry, but life insurance industry, they were co-ops. The companies were actually owned by the policyholders. Vanguard Financial, one of the world's largest financial services companies, investment management companies, is a cooperative. The people who put money in it own Vanguard. We have Wikipedia, we have Linux. It's not as though this model hasn't happened, but I think consumers are going to embrace models like that and take more responsibility for self-management collectively. Will that change everything in 2022? No, but what I would hope to see is more of these springing up in 2022, and say we come back in 2030, there will be gigantic tech companies that will have been overthrown completely by cooperative ventures. That would be mine. Does that work for you?
Wonderful
Mikhail?
forecast. Thank you so much. Thank you, Roger. Ваши аплодисменты, дамы и господа.
Thank you.
A round of applause for that, ladies and gentlemen.